Mi amor no tiene esperanza, aunque te esperará. Mi corazón se avanza, un fantasma corporeal. Mi amor no tiene venganza.
Alright, cheers everyone. Welcome back. After a long wait, I'm finally making another video. There's been quite a gap of about a half year, and there are two reasons for that. First of all, it's quite hard for me to film during weeks, so it has to be on a weekend, and if I don't have the time, then it gets passed on to a next week and the next, etc. And second of all, I like to keep this channel, these videos, about books that are really sort of unknown, really not a lot of people read or read or talk about, discuss on the internet. But that's not all I read, and sometimes I do read something that either people know about and it's not good. I'm not going to talk about it. And if it is good and people do know a bit about it, I don't really want to make a video about it. I can read William Gaddis, which is definitely underread author, but enough people are talking about him for me to not be interested in talking about him. At least not here. So those combined with a bit of laziness, I haven't been making any videos. And today I thought, you know what? I finished this book, I think maybe half a year ago, and figured that it would be nice to talk about, if only for the great title. And I finished this book maybe a day ago, 2 days ago. And that's definitely something that maybe even though Hans Henny Jahnn is perhaps more known a bit, it's still a name I want to make sure that you know about. But first, let me briefly start with this one, which is, I think, a bit more interesting. Well, let me first say that I put these two books down and wanted to talk about it, and I noticed that these are 13 uncomfortable stories, and these are also 13 short stories, which are in their own way uncomfortable, which is quite a nice symmetry that wasn't planned for at all, and I put them together and I thought, you know what, actually there's a bit of a mirror in between them. But let me put this out of the way and talk a bit about this, because what a title that is. Personally, that's the sole reason I bought it. Didn't know anything about it. I just bought it. A book for people who find television too slow. Cambodia. Well, that's an interesting title. That makes me want to read you. Originally found this title in, I think, also either a David Shields book or in link with another book by an author that I've talked about before, with Sven Lindqvist, Exterminate All the Brutes, because it's in the same vein, sort of a non-fiction-y fiction, or literary writing that is a bit on the spectrum of whether it's completely non-fic or memoir, or in this case it's actually short stories. So it is fiction, but there's also an essay underlined under the page, so I can show you in a bit, because it's quite an interesting idea that Brian Fawcett has, and he explains it in his own words in the preface, where he starts out by saying, in general, people, I'm just paraphrasing it, you can of course read it yourself, but he's saying, nowadays we see art as there are subtexts to art that are not really explicit, and if you're in the know, you recognize them and you know what the art is about. And maybe not everyone will understand it, but that's fine. That will be the status quo according to Brian Fawcett. And he says that's on two fronts quite inadequate. First of all, if we assume that someone does pick up on all the subtexts, that sounds a bit ludicrous. Like, you can have people who are very much well learned and still miss subtle texts because they're not explicit enough. And second of all, even if all of them would be comprehended by people who know, in the know, let's say, it's still, as they say here, create art based on an exclusionary subtexts he calls anti-democratic. I mean, you can agree or disagree with his proposition or his premise here, but definitely, if the base of your art is that you have to know certain things before you start getting it, then not everyone will get it. And he's against that. And he will solve this problem, which is the interesting part, by writing art, the short stories, 13 short stories, and also trying to make the subtext, both within the stories and also in the larger work, as explicit, well, as visible and literal to the best of his ability. And how does he do it? And you can flip around to any page where you see on the top half one story and on the bottom half something else. And this is actually his entire shtick throughout the book. There are 13 stories here. To be really honest, I wouldn't really want to make a video also on this book itself, because I just didn't think it was good enough of a book. Because the stories are not necessarily very good. Also, because I think they're a bit too on the nose, which is quite interesting, because that's what he wants. That's what he deliberately is trying to do. But so there's something in that. Me not enjoying that, I guess. Maybe I'm part of the anti-democratic elite. But there are 13 short stories on the top half, or the top 2/3 of the page, which are in some are completely ludicrous, others are sort of half documentary type style. It's quite interesting, different kinds of perspectives that he takes on. And on the bottom half, or bottom third, I'd say, he wrote an entire essay on Cambodia and the war in Cambodia and the Red Khmer and everything about that, about colonialism, anti-colonialism, modern world, how it affects war, how it affects Cambodia in particular, how Cambodia is maybe a small but very literal part to view, but it reflects a change in the larger world, talking a lot about the global village, which he sees as something that we would go towards when he wrote it, because everybody would be connected at some point in the internet. Well, not via the internet, but as it turned out, of course, that's the case. And there's actually quite an interesting story. Let me see if I find it from the title. Huxley's Satellite Dish 127, where the entire story is about there being a satellite dish in a small town, so they can watch the news and the TV from, I think, Toronto, one of the major cities. Maybe even Detroit. Yeah, there you go, Detroit, Michigan. The entire small town, because they can now live in sort of Detroit time, the entire town moves completely different. Instead of people working in the morning and lunch and then going to a bar, etc., instead of having their lives and watching TV, because it's just part of their lives. Now the TV guide basically dictates when they can go out, because they find it so important that they're part of what they call, a lot of people say it's sort of being part of the future, because there's a time zone difference. That's basically it. So they see television shows an hour earlier than the town next door, things like that, and it turns out flips it upside down completely. The sort of what we would say maybe normal order of TV is something you do when you have time, where now the town is so infected, in a sense, that their life follows from what the TV guide dictates. And it's just a short story about this, about interviews with people living there. It's quite fun. That's one of the stories that stuck with me the most, purely because it was just quite fun to read. Overall, as I said, the stories are quite on the nose with what they mean, or what Fawcett wants you to take away from them, and what he thinks is good, what he thinks is bad. So, as I said, I didn't really enjoy the stories as good literature, because, and that's the strange thing that I think about, because the subtext was so literal. I'm not even talking about the Cambodia essay, just the amount of how loud the message was in the stories. I thought to myself, this is a bit childish writing. It's not a great work of art if you have to scream your message, which is deliberately the kind of art that he's fighting against with this book. So figuring that out every time I read something was quite nice. It was quite interesting to read the story, think to myself, geez, that was on the nose, and then realizing, yeah, that's on purpose, and I'm falling for his plan. So that's quite interesting. The stories, as I said, for me didn't do all that much apart from that. The essay, on the other hand, was super interesting, and it's also why I brought Exterminate All the Brutes by Sven Lindqvist as well, because of course there's also a sort of essay about colonialism and so much more than that, but there's definitely a big overlap between the two, because brutalities in every country sort of stem from earlier brutalities, advancements in technology. That's what this talks about constantly, and this book also touches upon. What I also found interesting was that they both take Joseph Conrad in The Heart of Darkness and other stories by him, and talk about them quite extensively within their respective contexts. I personally hadn't read Joseph Conrad, so after reading this and then this, I figured, man, might as well get on it. So I read An Outpost for Progress, and I read Hearts of Darkness, and I absolutely loved them both. So that was an additional link between the two. So overall, trying to get this a bit snappier than normal. But overall, yeah, I quite enjoyed my time. I'm glad I bought it and glad I read it. As a recommendation or something, I think it might be, if it is somewhere in a library, definitely check it out. It's quite an interesting review on art. I think if you want to read it as a view on art and something more like that, then I think you will really enjoy it. A bit playfulness with subtexts. I think you will enjoy it. A bit of an experimental, fiction kind of work. For the stories alone, you shouldn't. If you're not particularly interested in experimental fiction, don't bother. But yeah, I overall really enjoyed my time with this. And with Fawcett out of the way, let me get on to a book that I just finished a couple of days ago. 13 Uncomfortable Stories by Hans Henny Jahnn. He's a German author. He's a very... this is in Dutch. I read it in Dutch. Originally, of course, in German. And he's a very, very little known expressionist, modernist writer. My German friends who have read him, quite mad that he's so little known, and most of them don't know about him at all. Just whenever you have the chance, read this author. That's all I'm really gonna say about it. The stories, there was a wild variety in approach in every single story. The sentences are absolutely staggeringly beautiful. Some of the stories didn't do all that much for me, but they were very good. But just, I'd say they were fine. They were good. But some of the stories, man, they blew me away. They were absolutely phenomenal. The 12th story would be translated to The Diver. That was absolutely staggering story, to the point where you really ask yourself, my God, how can someone exist and write these kinds of stuff? To be honest, I think this is, so I read this in January now. I think this already gonna be one of the best books I read this year. And it's so, the writing style is very much pushing the boundaries of what the reader would, what a reader would accept as sentences. They every now and then, some stories more than others, there's this very particular long-winded writing style, words that but you don't really want to see in literature all that often. And this story, The Diver in particular, I'm trying to find it, but made a bit of a mistake, I think. Let's see, 171. So it first starts with this man finding, not finding, but meeting a diver, a young black diver who dives in the water to perform for tourists. So they throw coins in the water and then he'll dive, and that's how he earns money. And this guy meets him and talks with him and becomes a bit of a friend, acquaintance, starts paying for him to live on, and just sits there and then also enjoys the view of him, the roughness, his body, the muscles, bit of aesthetic, and that he enjoys, and he pays to keep the guy alive, so he doesn't have to work all that hard. And then somewhere during the swim, he dies. The diver dies, and that already was for me quite an impactful story. Just the way it's written, it's beautiful. The sentences, again, they're absolutely phenomenal. But then the real story evolves in something else entirely, where we have this guy trying to bring a dead body to a hospital so that he can get it buried without any questions, because the guy where he was is not really a lot of respect for these divers, so he's trying to find a Spanish hospital that would allow him, and he meets this guy, a sort of larger-than-life god, which is called the Professor. Is a huge man that is incredibly strong and lives on top of a hill in a sort of old hospital where people come, and he solves things like, I've got a body and I need to get rid of it. And the entire conversation that the main character has with this professor just shapes up to be an entirely different world. The professor as a character, for me, was so incredibly interesting, so touching. The entire book. It's crazy how how well written, well, not really flowery, but how every sentence is super constructed, right? Nothing flows organically or natural. It's a constructed book, like really on the nose constructed. The sentences show you that. But the emotion that flows from them is absolutely breathtaking. And that is what's so incredibly unique, I think, about what I read here. It's just that it doesn't feel that it should be so emotional, because you notice how much craft is in the sentences. It's not free flowing from the heart. No, it's really crafted to perfection. But then my initial take would be, it might feel a bit cold. I might appreciate it. I won't be touched by it all that much. And I couldn't have been more wrong. Every time I finished the story, I had to read the last couple of pages again, a page and from the middle again, something. Every time I read a particular paragraph, I returned to it again, because the sentences kept me there, and the story and the emotions kept me going still. I'm gonna read everything by this author. I'm pretty sure about that. Try to find the copies in the German to see if I can decipher that properly, or fast enough at least. But yeah, for sure, if you know of any author, if you are, let's say, a German big fan of experimentalists, and you know someone who writes similar to Hans Henny Jahnn, then please leave a comment. I'm more than happy to check him out. It will be a great gift to me if you can recommend me people that write like this. This is really, truly, and that's why, even though there might be, I'm not quite sure, I didn't look all that much into it, there might be more discourse, more discussion, more talk about this author, where I would say too many people are talking about them. I'm not going to make a video, but right now, just because I wanted to make a video anyway, I finished it, I found it absolutely phenomenal. So I figured there's no harm in sharing this at all. So yeah, that's the two. I'm trying to make it a bit more of a snappy video, a bit more short, maybe less well thought out. Not that I ever really think about the books or about these videos before I start. But to conclude, first of all, I'm gonna try to maybe get videos out a bit more, period. Second of all, if you have a recommendation of a book that you find is really good and underread, please leave it in the comments or send me a message somewhere, or make your own video or link it, however you want to do it. But please, get it out there, that's for sure. And without further ado, then I'd say Happy New Year. I hope this will be an absolutely great reading year for all of you and for myself. And with that, I'll say goodbye. Cheers.
Amor no necesita esperanza, ver